to open up the workshop, and the first item on our workshop is the lady with the money tree.
It got COVID.
Fertilizer.
Mr. Daughter, going ahead. Am I going ahead or waiting? Are we waiting for?
Well, let's wait for Mr. Dodge.
While we're here, I just want to remind you all that your your financial statements due June 30th. Has to be postmarked. The supervisor of elections should have sent that to you. So I just like to always remind everybody. I haven't done mine
Mine's
either.
already been turned in.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
We read about it.
Yeah,
I know you did.
Yeah, I confirmed with the elections office that the one I filled out for them is gonna go to the state.
Yep.
The state.
Goes straight to them.
Ms. Crow, you all ready for Hamilton? T minus. Hamilton, for those who don't know, is going to be on Disney Channel. It is big news for those of us in the entertainment world that are excited about it. So you're going to be able to see Hamilton. July 3rd.
Yes. Yes. Oh, wow. July.
Yep. And it looks awesome. It's all the original cast, I believe, that's going to be in it. So.
Most of them
Yeah, most of it. You probably saw the original cast. You did not. I'm disappointed.
are. Me too.
So the governor has the budget, though.
I can't say her name,
Yes,
I apologize.
No.
And one of his instructions was to knock out the petition. That's his priority. Yeah, he's got an opportunity to make it right.
Good morning. So, since the governor has not signed the budget, we decided I was gonna go over the different types of CARES Act funding for you today. So I wanted to go over those, just a brief little overview so you understand what money is coming to our district from the CARES Act. So there's 3 different categories, and this is statewide. The K-12 fund, which is the ESSER, they all have little acronyms, is $770 million. The LEA's entitlements is 90% of that, which is $693 million. The governor's fund, the GEAR, is $173 million, and he has 64 million set aside for 2021 summer recovery. And then we have the higher education fund, which is the HERF, and that's $873 million. And all the colleges are getting money, but since we have a state technical college, they are receiving about $26 million. So I'm gonna go over each one of those with you. The ESSER money, the purpose of this is to provide the LEAs to address the impact that the novel corona disease 2019 has had and continues to have on elementary and secondary schools in Florida. This includes developing and implementing plans for educational services and continued learning, whether school campuses are opened or closed. Right, the Citrus County, our allocation is $4,258,105.42. It's based on the percentage of our final Title I Part A allocation. So we received, I think it was 0.61% of the total state Title I allocation. So we're getting 0.61% of the ESSER funding. The budget period is June 1st through September 30th of 2022. We are allowed to backdate expenses we've had since the date the governor declared a state of emergency, or the president declared a state of emergency on March 13th. The toolkit, which is basically the budget and everything that we have to them, is due June 30th, so there's a very quick turnaround with this. We had a webinar about a week and a half ago on it. We are one of the assurances, we have to have equitable services to students and educators in non-public schools. And Ms. Johnson and her staff have been contacting them, and there are some of the schools that are interested in participating in this piece. The charter schools also entitled to part of this allocation based on their third survey FTE. There's no prohibition for supplanting, so we are able to replace our operational funds with this fund, which is different than most federal funds. We can't supplant, but we are able to with this one. And we may also charge an indirect cost, which we charge on most of our federal grants. Okay, so with that fund, right now we have our, the question's been posed to use that to help supplement the salaries of the support staff that we continue to pay while they were working at home, whether they were doing professional development or, you know, the custodians, the bus drivers, the people that were having to stay home that weren't doing their normal jobs, but we still continued to pay them. So we're looking to use that to basically supplant that income for us from this past school year. So to kind of use up the money so we're not at the end trying to use it up, get it used up, and pretty much be done with that piece of it. So that's, the question has been posed to use. Many of the districts are trying to do that, and the Florida DOE is posing that to make sure that we're okay before we process the whole application.
So we can go back to the March 13th date.
Yes, sir.
All of those staff members that, and I think in some cases we were instructed to keep as many of those in on our, you know, and not furlough them.
Correct.
So, and we did that.
We did that.
The superintendent, you've done a fabulous job at trying to utilize that around the, so those we would be able to use
Yes.
by, I know it says we can't supplant, but by having some of that cost.
We can supplant.
Okay, I'm
So
sorry.
that's the one benefit of this.
So we can supplant, and that frees up then those resources
To be used
to be
for
used
other
elsewhere
things,
for
yes,
others.
yes. Some of this money could be used for supplies and things like that. There is FEMA funding out there. I just attended a webinar last week that we should be able to recoup, you know, a percentage of the monies that we've spent on sanitizers and cleansers and signs, and there's certain things that the mask, there's a question of whether they'll reimburse us for that, but we are able to get, we were just talking about Health and Human Services is sending masks for staff, and the Sheriff's Office has also been allocated masks that are to be given to staff for us. So for next year, we're pretty much covered for the entire year for staff to have masks. So the FEMA funding, it's just kind of, you put it in, you see what they're gonna reimburse us, but we can't double dip. We couldn't ask for funding from this and from FEMA. So, you know, the best way is to try and get the FEMA funding for the supplies. We cannot get FEMA funding for any salaries or anything, as we are not a healthcare facility, so we are not able to do that. So, any other questions on the ESSER funding?
I've got a question. Have you run any figures, any projections yet on that?
On the,
The 4.25 million, so that's the amount, right?
this amount that we're receiving?
Versus our wages that we've paid.
For the support staff that, for them that have stayed, that were sent home and stayed home, that it ran right around $4 million for the 2 months that they were staying home. So we're really like pretty much, and we have to distribute some of that to the private schools. So some of that will go to that, and the indirect cost ends up being about $300,000 or $400,000 we were able to recoup back for indirect costs. So that's pretty much the whole amount. Any other questions?
And yet, I mean, we did have that money already budgeted, so, I mean, it's a good deal for us.
Yes. Yes, it should, I mean, it helps us put money back into our fund balance. We weren't getting the work out of everybody, but we were able to keep paying them, so that's the benefit there.
But I would say, while it, for the moment, may feel that way, we also have an increased number of staff that's gonna be needed as we open our schools back up, that, I mean, as we know, a custodian right now covers about 20,000 square feet. Under last year's, conditions, under COVID, we have a very unique situation coming up. So I'm assuming we're gonna be paying it now in a different direction.
Exactly. That helps us take care of our costs for, our better fund balance to end the year, the better we are for next year, so.
I agree, I mean, I think
Yeah.
too, the custodians, and I know we're gonna get that discussion, but we need to expand, our custodians.
And I use custodians, it's gonna, I mean, I think the plan will, I'm sure Mr. Bishop's gonna tell me 3 or 4 different other areas I haven't thought of yet, that he's gonna say, well, by the way, we're gonna need it for this, that, and the other thing.
The masks, you said that there's coming from the sheriff's office, but that's through FEMA though, right? Is that-
Right, they're coming from FEMA through the sheriff's office to us, but then there's also Health and Human Services had a program that actually I put in the orders last night, that they were providing the reusable masks for staff.
What about for students?
For students, we are funding those right now. We have started to receive shipments of those. Actually, this morning, we received 350,000 masks, the adult masks.
And we'll discuss masks when we go through our plan, because we are not going to mandate, excuse me. Our recommendation today will be not to mandate in the fall masks for students, but we'll get into the masks.
Right, but we
Right
don't,
now, that's for summer.
but we don't have any indication that any agency is gonna provide us funding for masks for students.
Correct.
It is for staff though.
Right, for staff, yes.
And they work through DOE to come up with their numbers, because they sent us a huge spreadsheet on how many masks every school district could get for staff.
And now that was FEMA, you mean?
That
worked
was
with-
one that we gave the Carl in.
Okay, good. So, I mean, that worked out well then.
That was about 66,000 masks we're getting, that we've not received yet.
And then we ordered about the same from Health and Human Services, so.
Good.
Did you have anything else? Okay. Right, so the next pot of money is the gear. This is the governor's fund. And this is to address the impact of the novel coronavirus. It includes developing and implementing summer recovery programs prioritizing target students with significant academic needs. And those are the students that have been disconnected or hard to reach during distant learning. Our K-3 students for 1920, which are 1 through 4 for 2021. With a substantial deficiency in reading based on the most recent available screening and progress monitoring assessments or other forms of assessment. Teacher recommendations, K-3 students who may be at risk of retention, and any 3rd grade student with a substantial deficiency in reading must be prioritized. Also for grades 4 through 5 students who were level 1 or 2 on their most recent FSA and are served in the lowest 300 performing or D and F schools across the state will be eligible for summer programs options to enhance literacy in reading and math. Okay. Now this one has a very quick turnaround time. We were allocated $393,000, and this is also was based on our Part 1 Title 1 Part A allocation. The budget period is June 1st through August 31st of this year, so this one has a much quicker turnaround time. We are allowed to use pre-award costs. We don't really see any of those that we're going to be able to use because it's supposed to be for summer learning. It's also due June 30th. We have to assure equitable services to students and educators in non-public schools. I believe we have one public school. Is Renee here? No. I think there's one public school, or non-public school that's going to participate in the summer. Charter schools are entitled. We don't have any charter schools with those grade level students. And you cannot charge indirect cost on this one. So Feverishly, Lynn and Renee have been working to get summer school started. This is to bring children back into the brick and mortar schools. They have to be given 80 hours of instruction. So they are preparing to offer summer school at Crest, IPS, Crystal River Primary, and Forest Ridge. Okay, so that's what they're working
And
on.
Ms. Wilson, this is conditional on that this money is for, and is only for face-to-face instruction.
Yes,
So this does not allow a virtual family to consider using this, or this funding will not be to use this, so.
correct. This is to bring the students back in face-to-face, and they have to be given 80 hours. And so any and all expenses we have related to that, we were trying to pull in so that we can spend this money and, help these students that are severely needed.
I believe this was part of the governor's reopening plan, or DOE's reopening plan, where it specifically was saying you will bring them back. If you want this, you will bring them back. The other piece of this is that, and Ms. Emily will get you, is that we, this potentially is going to, I think, give Mr. Bishop and Mr. Mullins' departments an opportunity to maybe test some, as we reopen some of our classrooms, it will give some controlled environments with that, which I think is an excellent opportunity. And while it's I know a little nervous because we have really had face-to-face schooling, I'm really appreciative that it looks like you guys are trying to make those plans and take into all those incorporations. I'm sorry, Ms. Emily.
This was another plan that districts across the state had in full gear, where they were going to do virtual summer school. Some were going to bring a couple kids in at a time. This is Commissioner Corcoran's baby about face-to-face instruction. So they've given school districts the 80 hours, but it has to be done within 4 to 6 weeks. I was on a call yesterday. They may give us a little flexibility towards the end of it, but our staff has already figured out how we're going to get the 80 hours in before school starts. So it was another one of those things that we heard on TV.
Will we, Ms. Kirby, is there an opportunity, because I know your department's under a serious mandate when it comes to doing IEP renewals and reviews. Is there any opportunity with any of these students to get a jump start on that, or is that not really quite ready for tough prime time?
But we are inviting all of our students that were already participating in the remote learning to attend this. We've gone back over students who had previously refused because of the remote learning aspect of it and re-inviting them. And then it's open basically to any student within the IEP in those grade levels because they're, by the very nature, an at-risk student, as well as all of our tiered students.
So when will will they not be able to start getting reviewed at that early? Because there's going to be a lot of IEPs I know you're going to have to go
Right
through.
now, just to let you know,
Yeah, we
the
have
Zoom
two
was
that are
a
related to it,
wonderful
so-
option for our specialists. To my knowledge,
Number,
we're not
yeah,
behind
that
the
one.
eight.
Oh, that's amazing.
Number 4.
Now, evaluations are a different topic, but
Understand.
actual IEP meetings, we are all up to date on that. They come back on July 20th, and those will re-begin on July 20th, just as always. And then again, we're gonna be targeting those students that have been not in the educational system or basically not receiving any real services, and they'll be our first priority once they do return.
Thank you, Ms. Kirby.
Any other questions on the gear? All right, so I'll move on to the Higher Education Fund, which is the HERF. And this was available rather quickly. This went through a different process, as this is our secondary or our post-secondary educational facility. There's 2 portions of this. The student aid portion, which is provided to institutions to provide emergency financial aid grants to students whose lives have been disrupted, many of whom are facing financial challenges and struggling to make ends meet. And then the institutional portion is to cover any costs associated with significant changes to the delivery of instruction due to the coronavirus. The student aid portion for Citrus County was $201,878. This serves 254 students received $788.59, and we had 2 students who received $788.07. So that, those checks were cut rather quickly. They came up with a plan for the students to come pick them up. I know some of the checks are still sitting there, but they did have quite a here's your pen, you get to keep it, and masked everybody up and got those checks out to the students. So,
And let me remind parents, because if you have a child that's in post-secondary, you probably didn't get a stimulus check for them. And I was a little kind of, what do you mean you didn't get a stimulus check? You know, the $600, you I'm sure probably had that same thing with, and I'm going, wait a minute, they're still under, you know, they're still under our care, they're still under, we didn't get that, and then the answer was, they said, oh no, you have the HERF money that they're gonna get.
right.
So encourage your kid to go pick up the check, and then ask them for it to endorse it over.
So the institution portion was an equal amount or $1 less, it was an uneven amount. This was they based this allocation, it was 75% based on the FTE of Pell Grant recipients and 25% based on the FTE of non-Pell Grant recipients. And you know, talking to WTC, they went back and forth, like you could only give it to Pell Grant recipients, then it was like, no, everybody needs to get it. So they, you know, kept changing things, and the school did very well to meet those guidelines. It must be spent, all of it, by September 30th of 2022. Within the last few weeks, an additional funding of $96,245 to bring all higher educational facilities to a minimum of $500,000 was allocated. This portion, 50% has to be used for student aid, and they're going to use that for students who have continued to enroll in the school, and institutional costs. So that was an additional money that they got. I know one district, like the additional funds ended up with like 400,000 more, so they hadn't got very much in the very beginning, but they were able to get more that way. So WTC's also been buying supplies and things like that for the institutional portion, and I know that Mrs. Bishop has a plan on what to do with the rest of the funds. So, any other questions? All right, so that's all I have for you today, and I'm gonna turn you over to the rest of the group here.
Well, it sounds like you guys are on a tight schedule here with these plans, so I know it's
Yes.
unforeseen in some ways, but you know, thank you for what you guys are doing in the finance department.
Thank you.
Can you send us a copy of that to our email?
Yes, I can.
All right, next up is policy review, Mr. Dixon.
Good morning, everyone. First item on the workshop this morning is the policy 2.70, prohibiting discrimination, including sexual and other forms of harassment. We just basically needed to add a reference to the timeline for filing complaints, and we had to update policy 6.35, which is the complaint procedure, in order to do that. So this one was held up until that one could be updated. So in section 6, in the last sentence, it says the timeline for filing complaints of discrimination, sexual harassment, or other forms of illegal harassment is provided in policy 6.35, complaint procedure for personnel and others, which you'll be considering next. Are there any questions about that?
I have one that you, because you've got it linked together. The school board is mentioned in 270, but not mentioned in 635. So have we changed the complaint procedure? Because usually one of the last resorts would, they could come before the board, and this one level 4 stops at the superintendent's level.
It's a different complaint procedure.
It's so school board is no longer gonna be involved in any complaints.
No, ma'am. This is different. Like, if someone files a complaint against an employee, that's a different procedure.
Okay.
That's a 120 hearing when it comes in front of you. This is basically, if you say like a rule or a policy that y'all created was not, applied to me fairly or whatever, then this is a different type of complaint procedure.
Okay, so I know we're part of the policy, but the complaint is totally different.
All expulsions, all instructional or non-instructional complaints or disciplines and everything still come before you. This policy's always been here, we just rewrote it.
Okay,
Mr. Bradshaw, this is the complaint against a rule having to do with operations.
Yes.
And that's why it doesn't come to us. If it becomes then a violation of the policy, then it would be the recommendation of the superintendent. It would come before us, and that's when statute would
Yes.
kick in about,
Yeah, you didn't apply the rules to me fairly,
Right.
or you applied it different to me than you did to you. And so this is the procedure to go through and have it reviewed first at the lowest level, can't be resolved all the way up to the superintendent.
which is all operational,
Correct.
and that's why it falls under the
Yes.
superintendent.
And was that a law change or on the 60 days, right? Because they basically have 60 days now to file a complaint, is that right?
On this?
Well, I think it references it in the next policy, right, on the timeline. The timeline for filing complaints and discrimination. So that's what we've added to this policy, right? But is it 60 days, is that what it is now?
I think it's always been that. But this is not a, like discrimination, this rule applied to a male is being, applied differently to me because I'm a female or something like that. But you can't let it sit out there for a year and then come in and do it. Because if this is designed to give us a chance to correct things, if we're finding out that the policy was not written, where it's having a disproportionate effect or by the wording of it, it's a way for that to take place.
So we're talking about 6.35 now, right?
I was talking about 635, but it referenced the timeline, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm actually talking about, no, I'm actually talking about the current policy on 2.70. The only thing you're saying,
Yeah, the only thing we're changing in that
you're
is
adding the
the last
sentence about the
sentence.
timeline.
Yes,
Right.
to make it clear that that's the timeline for filing the prohibiting discrimination, including sexual and other forms of harassment.
And I guess the question was, is the timeline 60 days? Because that's what it says in 635, right?
Right, so that's, moving on to 635, we're okay with 2.70, okay. So 6.35 is a complete rewrite that basically, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hit that. It defines the entire procedure and the timeline that you have to file and how the process works.
And I think that's what this council was referencing. There's no information of coming to the school board, but it is an operational issue that the superintendent
yeah.
handles.
Yes.
So again, my question is the timeline for filing a complaint 60 days?
Oh. Yes.
I read that on, let's see,
It's,
page 2.
H7.
Yes.
Mhm.
But that was in our prior policy, believe with that.
We just rewrote the entire thing, that's why it's all underlined. I believe that was in the prior policy.
And I will include that in the strikeout of the final version of the existing policy, so you can see that when you go to public hearing. I meant to include that with the workshop, sorry about that. Any other questions? 6.35.
The representative, so they can have any person with them as a representative.
Correct.
Okay. And then the third item is related to the fourth item too. Basically, this came up as an issue with athletic injuries or what guidebook or so, and if you're participating in an event that's not at the school, like an extracurricular activity or a sporting event. So it's adding in section 2, students sustaining injuries at a school-sponsored athletic event will be administered to by the procedures in the FHSAA handbook, as opposed to the Florida Department of Health's emergency guidelines for schools, because that's a big document that the coaches aren't necessarily trained, and the school nurses are, but not the coaches. So if they're at an athletic event, section 2 would apply. If they're at the school, section 1 would apply.
But what happens if they're on a field trip? That's not at school and they're not on an athletic event. But that was the only thing that I didn't see where that would fall. And because it said student injury, it didn't say student injury at athletic events or something of that nature. So-
Well, number 2 is limited to athletic events.
Yeah, but I think it's number one.
But I'm saying, I mean, it says student injuries, and then it says students sustained injuries at school. Then it has the other one, students sustained injuries at school-sponsored athletic events. But what is the expectation then when they're on a off-campus?
Isn't that an extension of the classroom?
And that may be, but then I didn't know if that would be specified.
And I don't know if that's in our school health service plan or not. I couldn't.
We did discuss that. I think they call 911, or they have.
But I didn't know because this referred to, this speaks to that. I didn't know if students sustained injuries at school or school-sponsored events. That made sense unless it says school-sponsored non-athletic events. Because again, there just seems to be a hole there now.
I see what you're saying.
I mean, I think there's a couple of ways it could be fixed, and I'm okay if staff needs to find what that language is. We don't have to wordsmith it here, but that's the only thing I think could be just addressed.
We'll have an answer, address that when you come.
And just when it comes back
Comes
before
back
the
at the
board.
meeting to approve for advertising, and we can modify it.
Yeah.
And my item on that was that the definition of an athletic event, I mean, practices may not be considered an athletic event, right? I mean, I'm thinking an event as being a competition. So I didn't know if we wanted a school-sponsored athletic event or activity, I don't know, or practice.
That's not a bad idea. And Mr. Bishop, do you have any thoughts on
Yeah, the
that?
only thing I would say to that is House Bill 7011 does point out that the requirements for athletic events also carry over to summer conditioning as well as practices. So like the requirements for having those cold water immersion tubs, cool zones, and having certified, CPR certified, AED certified staff present also is not limited just to the athletic event or competition, but practices and summer conditioning as well.
Would there be any problem with then saying school-sponsored athletic activity and event and/or event?
I don't have an issue with that. You?
I mean,
I don't have an issue with that. I mean, that's more inclusive.
Because you're saying it already it really is binding us to it anyway, because you're saying an event does that, but if there was just a question.
Okay, we'll just add that for student injuries. So it will read, students sustaining injuries at school-sponsored athletic activities or events will be administered to by procedures in FHSSA. Any other questions about 5.60? 5.80, number 4, adding section number 4.
Make the same change.
Same change because we wanted to put it in this particular policy because this is the one the coaches refer to.
And I spoke with Mr. Dixon briefly about this, but I would like us to put in here a reference to the Zachary Martin Act that's coming up. I mean, it hasn't been signed yet, but it is referenced to 7011, and we need to put something in there. We can be broad on the heat-related illness, but I think it would be wise to have a section. I mean, we have the AEDs covered in here, but it is going to be state law when the governor signs it, and I think we can reference a broad scope, a broad brush approach here to the heat-related illness, and maybe we want to add the CPR in there too. We have the AEDs covered, but I think it would be good. I mean, we'll still be able to reference the FHSAA guidelines, but I think it's important that we include that in our policy on athletics.
Yeah, I think we definitely can do that. I think we just put that we'll follow all requirements outlined in the Zachary Martin legislation, something to that effect. But we can wordsmith that and bring it back.
Yeah, and just reference heat-related illness and seriousness of that or whatever. I mean, we've done a great job with the weather stem and the wet bulb flow thermometer, the ambient temperature readings, the cold water immersion tubs. I'm not necessarily saying we need to put all that in the policy, right? I mean, it's.
No, I just think a simple statement in there saying we'll
Something
follow all
that we-
requirements outlined in the Zachary Martin Act.
We recognize
Be improved, you know?
the heat-related illness aspect, the seriousness of that. Thank you.
We can just add that as a new section 5 if you want, and put it right underneath the new section on athletic injuries.
Okay, yes, something can be worse. I mean, it's not going to hold us up on using this thing.
I think he'll end up probably signing it before it comes before us.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, so I think it's smart.
I can get that from Mr. Bishop and plug that in.
They're scrambling to get the
sensors and everything else.
Yeah.
We'll take care of that. But then, any other comments on 5.80? Okay. Number 5 is 6.20, some modifications to certification of administrative and instructional personnel. And Ms. Swain, I think, could speak to this, or Brendan, if you have questions.
A couple of things that we put into place per statute was the general knowledge test that people were failing for temporary certificates. They wanted to put on the place with districts to help them pass the general knowledge test, and we have done that the last couple of years with tutoring. We first started with tutoring, one-on-one tutoring, a small group tutoring, where we had teachers, we would pair teachers to tutor teachers that had the temporary certificate to pass the general knowledge test. But then we went a little further on with NAVA Ed, working with them very closely with their study guides, getting more study guides. And then last, it was probably around February before this whole thing started, we actually had NAVA Ed come up here with 50 of our teachers that need the general knowledge and did one-on-one tutoring with them in that small group and worked with them very closely on all 4 sections of the general knowledge test, which we're hoping is going to be very successful. We've also working with NAVA Ed to purchase online tutoring now for additional people, for the new people coming in with for the temporary certificates, where NAVA Ed, once they sign up, and we took the cost with Title II and worked very closely with Title I as well to help them get some additional funds and additional support for the general knowledge test. And we're going to see how that goes, because we know we can't do that whole group sessions anymore. So now that Ed came out with the online tutoring as well. So we're going to put that into place as well. So that was part A. We also have tons of study books that we have purchased with general knowledge, not only general knowledge, but also subject area tests that we have purchased from K to 6 to social science, to any type of test that they need. They can just check it out, use it for a month, take the test, hopefully they pass and they're successful with it, and then they just give us a study guide back, and then, you know, we send it on to the new person. So we make sure that when we have our TIP meetings, that we make sure that the new teachers know that they have these supplies and it's available to them. Any questions?
Why is an adjunct teaching certificate only good for 3 years?
That's always been, our temporary certificate is 3 years, and also everybody that holds a temporary certificate has a different statement of eligibility. If, we'll just give an example, if somebody comes in with a psychology degree, they're eligible for a temporary certificate in social science. If they get a position in elementary ed, which where they usually go is elementary ed, and then they're out of field, have to take the elementary ed test, and then follow everything on their statement of eligibility, which goes from the general knowledge test, professional ed test, completion of the district competence, which is the TIP, and then a bunch of college coursework.
But this will give them 3 years to do that.
It's 3 years. Temporary certificates are only 3 years.
And then
They have to have all that stuff done.
we help them a lot.
And then number 6, the last item is just clarification on the family and medical leave policy, 6.542, just to define who is eligible. So it's all eligible school employees who have met the federal eligibility requirements, which is defined as persons who have been working for the employer for at least 12 months. So that the purpose of this is just to clarify who is eligible.
Part of, I think, is much too limited, we need to take a look at ourselves, for the school system. And you said that, when would that be a possibility to do that?
Well, we comply with the FMLA Act, as I understand it, and if we go above and beyond the FMLA Act, there would be a cost associated with that, so we would have to look at that as a separate issue. But currently this policy refers to the FMLA, and it just defines who is eligible based on the
I
family.
understand, but the, one thing that struck me on this is people employed in the school system have 12 weeks of unpaid leave a year, 3 months. And then when it goes back to federal, the people fall under that will only have 6 months. And when you look at the reasons that a person can take time off, they don't make sense to me because they're not equitable. Like on A, it's a birth of a child and care of the child's birth, that's good. Adoption of a child, yes, fine. It was talking about 12 weeks. Placing the child in foster care, 12 weeks. But then it goes down to D, the care of a spouse, child, or parent of the employee who has a serious health condition. 12 weeks, it's not enough of that. And I think there should be a change, it should be extended as the federal one, where you have, say, 6 months. The next one is also treatment of a serious health condition of the employee. Again, not as much, there's a difference between the child being born, you're taking care of a child for 12 weeks is a great period of time, it's wonderful. But if a person has a serious illness, 12 weeks is not enough time. So I think that we need to review the whole thing and increase. I know you said you don't want to decrease, or you can't decrease that, some special thing. Don't want to decrease, want to increase. Well, I know we have to take a look at the monies, but I think it's only fair to give someone who's working in our system and they do have a serious illness. Let's say it takes them 4 months to get treatment for it. Well, here it says only 3 months. But the person who maybe has a new member of the family can have the 3 months as well. So serious illness and a member of the family coming in, those don't equate with each other. Those aren't the same thing. We need to take a look at it.
And I'm certainly open to that, Ms. Powers, as well. You mentioned that there's a cost factor, but am I correct, this is unpaid leave
Yes, but the positions would remain open. I think that would be the issue is, I mean, we could, I'm sure we could look at that as a separate issue, but as far as this current update is just to define who is eligible. But if you would like, and the board would like, that
Could we pass this forward with then asking though that staff look at that so that we could bring it back to us, but not necessarily hold this one up? Is that something, or are you wanting to hold it up right now?
Well, I'd like to see it looked at.
To look at and before
Yeah,
then?
it's not it can be looked at before the next meeting.
But also the cost implications rest in the fact that people on FMLA get board match. So the board contribution or the subsidy that the board gives for the offset of the health insurance cost. What I would recommend is that we do a cost analysis, go back and look in a year's time, how many people do we have out on the FMLA and see what the financial implication would be. That way the board can make an informed decision as whether or not that's something you want to pursue further.
And that would go into a question of, could there be though the option that they could still have the protection of the position after 12, but they could have another 12 weeks without the board match?
Certainly that's a conversation.
I mean, that's just another way we could look at it. There is, I know, under provision 2, if you're military, you can, I believe, stack it, which is understandable. It's part of the military. But that could be another way we look at it, where there's not a cost to the district, but we could provide the benefit for an additional, say, 12 weeks.
Certainly, I think it was a conversation.
So I mean, I'm open to that, Ms. Powers.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we're meeting the minimum requirements of the FMLA, right? Family
Right.
Medical Leave Act, which is what we've done, but I mean, I would be willing to look at that if we feel like it, you know, the board wants to move ahead. I don't mind looking at a cost analysis on that would cost. Yeah.
Thank you,
I
Ms.
think that's a
Powers.
good idea.
I agree with that. When I look at what the private sector is doing, it's phenomenal. I know we don't have the money to do what the private sector is doing, but it is phenomenal. My grandson and his wife just gave birth. He gets 4 months paternity leave. I think that's remarkable. He's gonna come here in November and December and spend it with me. With
And
those
spend money
babies.
here.
With those babies. Yeah, I know we can't afford that, but we need to take a look at what's happening in the private sector.
Okay, so do you want to go ahead and move forward with this and at the same time look at the issue and maybe bring it back as a
Yes.
separate? Okay.
Johnny,
Yes, ma'am.
the question was, in what we're doing, should we look at this, move, and then bring it back, or should we sort of postpone this and wait till we get information?
Anitra, is it immediacy? Is there immediate need for us to get this approved today, or we can bring it back? So why don't we table it and we'll bring it back
Okay.
with some of that information for
I
you.
feel
Is that okay?
pretty
Thank
good
you,
about
Mr.
that,
Commissioner.
yeah.
These are all information right now.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a workshop, so we can hold this and then bring it back and then just hold this. Is this really just to clarify who's eligible in the policy? That concludes the policy updates.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you.
Good luck to Carolyn.
I'll tell her.
The board is with her.
Yes.
Educational technology.
Good morning. I come before you to solicit some feedback on the idea of adding iPads to kindergarten, first and second on a one-to-one basis. As you know, we have one-to-one for 3rd grade through 12th. And recently, when we had to prepare and respond to distance learning, we were asking parents to notify us if they needed the device, because we had to kind of grab what we had been using in a shared model in kindergarten, first and second, and then provide those to the families that needed it. What we did find along the way is that presented families some additional challenges though, because the device that they had at home at times didn't work as well with the curriculum that we needed the babies to be accessing. And so I know we fielded a lot of tech support questions on that, and we would try to encourage them, if you're having difficulties, just come get a device. But with the unknowns looming ahead of us, we wanted to see what your thoughts were about purchasing iPads for kindergarten through second. And so you should have the attachment where I asked Patty from Apple, if you remember Patty, she's come before us a few times with me. And I asked her to provide pricing for, it would be about 3,800 iPads to take care of kindergarten first and second. And she provided 2 different models. We could look at a purchase directly outright, but what I provided to you was the lease option, because that takes the amount and then they will break it up over 3 years. And so we would pay similarly to what we did last year with the 11,600 that we purchased. And so the lease option would be $432,186. And so then after 3 years, it would belong to us. We would just pay $1 and they would be ours. So do you have any thoughts?
Ms. Androsky, first of all, thank you, because this has been, I know you fielded a lot of those parents that were frustrated. They used devices that are unfortunately older devices, which did not allow for the security and the timely of being able to get students lessons. And so a lot of times I know you had staff and volunteers that were scouring, trying to help parents come back to the school, let's try and find you a device that meets the qualifications and the standards so that they could deliver and continue to deliver instruction. So thank you to you and your team for doing that.
And to you as well. You did that also.
Well, thank you, but you all did the real work. It was me sometimes just setting up a bad signal. Do we know if any of the CARES money can be used for any of this to offset that, or is any of that can it be impacted?
You can, but again, as Tammy explained to you earlier, we were gonna use that money to offset expenses we already.
No, I mean, I guess it's gonna offset that. Does that give us any resources back from what that will cover to help offset any of this cost?
That would be up to the board and the budget. I mean, we can, if you wanted to take it out of the operating budget, then that's $1 million less you have in the operating budget.
Do we have it within capital then to be able to do this, or are we it's gonna be the shift?
It's not currently in the budget, so if you add it to the budget, if you add it to the expenses, then something would come out. So, I mean, but it's the same way in the operating. If you took it out of the operating, then that's $1 million, 1.3 million less you would have to spend in there.
And it looks like about 432,000 for this coming year.
We did the lease, yeah.
Right.
What is the numbers? I mean, we don't have 3,800 K first and second, do we? I thought it was a little bit less than that. No, was that?
I took the enrollment projection for next year, and then I put in a 10% buffer, because you need to prepare for, as they are damaged, you have another one to provide to them.
And how would that look for the students in the classroom? I mean, we would be planning this in case we had to go to remote learning.
Well, we wouldn't just leave them on the shelf. We would implement them into the curriculum now, and then they would have them if we had to go to remote learning. But it's not that we wouldn't use them. And some of that will be just talked about in the plan a little bit later. But certainly if we had the devices K through second grade, we would use them in kindergarten through second grade.
And I'm assuming they would be able to be used for iReady,
Absolutely.
which would probably be the first implementation of the thing. And I see Ms. Lowe back there, who's one of our administrators, that would be saying yes. And I say that because iReady is going to be a huge piece of when we go back of diagnostic, differentiating, and knowing what our students need to be doing. The device is going to allow for that. Because the challenge we have is we have a depleting testing lab or computer labs at each of the schools. They're already not really able to meet the needs of that. They've been, I think, trying to meet the needs of K through third when it comes to iReady diagnostic and so forth. We're sending those kids in there because they don't have a class set like the other kids.
And I'll just tell you, at one time, having an iPad was considered like a luxury in education. Now, having a device is not a luxury, it's a necessity. If we hadn't had devices in March when we did when we had to go to distance learning, we would not have been able to do what we did as successfully. It would have been all packets, and it would have been quite an ordeal. With that being said, when we make these purchases, and I know you understand this, they're not lifelong devices. They're almost like an expendable material now. We're still chasing 1,900 of the ones we have issued out, trying to track them down and get them back in. So it's quite massive for staff to do that. So
I'm all for supporting our youngest children.
I think the challenge that we're gonna have is if we didn't do this, we have the learning gaps that I know, that I see in Ms. Kaler's nodding. That's a challenge, that whether we go to distant learning or anything, we have that challenge, and those tools are more essential than ever. And I think in talking with you all individually, you've shared with me this, again, it's not a luxury. This is broadening the tools available to those teachers so that they can be most effective individually for the learning of that student. Ms. Kirby has talked to me about how, the individual opportunities for our ESE students and whether that's communication, whether that's specific, accommodations that the devices provide that. And then the other piece that we know is we have a huge unknown, and I know you're going to talk to us about some options, but even every plan you guys have tried to do, next week we don't know what it's going to be. And if we find ourselves in having to consider a lot of different things, I know the superintendent's going to be saying, okay, now how do we do this? And we'll do it. We will meet the need. This is becoming more and more essential to, I think, the operations. And I don't think that all of you are here to just ask for a frivolous need, because I know that's just not in any of you. And so, I think that I would be supportive of this. It's still the board's pleasure, but I think this is an essential need going forward.
Well, my concern too, and I'm glad Mrs. Lau is here, but our district and a lot of the other districts across the state had problems with this K-12 going that distance learning because the parents didn't understand what they had to do. So would that close that gap with the programs that we would put on the iPad if we go distance learning or remote learning with our kids again, and the parents would be able to use these?
So I know that they will speak to this in more depth in a minute, but I do want to go back to what Mr. Kennedy said. And Mr. Kennedy was on a Facebook group, and I was on there quite a bit as well, watching the problems that the families were having. And quite often it was that they weren't understanding how to access the programs on their own devices, whether it be their computer or their phone or their own tablet, or they were finding out that, for example, iReady didn't work on a Kindle, and that's what they had at home. Or just had, our students, the more that we prepare them in the class for how to access these items, the easier it is when they go home. This is just a personal story, but my daughter was having a rough night one night, and she said, you need to teach me, I don't know how to get to any of these things. And I said, listen, it's okay, just let Gianna teach you. and because she was using it enough, and that's the point, is we need to make it so that it's comfortable for the students. They know how to do it on the iPads at school, so if they have those iPads with them, then that's a step in the right direction. We need to continue to provide helpful documents and training videos and parent nights for the parents as well, so that they're comfortable. But I think so, and I think speaking to the schools, some of the schools have been able to purchase some additional iPads on their own over the years, but that's not the case with every school. And so, my heart always thinks about equity, and it bothers me that it's not the same at every school. That one school might have a few extra iPads for those kindergarten, first and second to participate in iReady or to send them home. And then another school maybe hasn't had that ability or hasn't done that. And so they're, you know, I think you're right. I think it definitely helps for the families at home.
And Ms. Androsky's, you know, right, a lot of what I fielded phone calls, there was certainly, Ms. Count's parents that realized it was a very
Yeah.
different obligation for their students' work. And I think teachers instantly were very valued overnight for the work that they do, and we were so appreciative for that.
I still laughed at the one parent that wrote a note in the sound off in the Chronicle that wanted to know how they could find a substitute.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But what was a very, very common problem, and it was sometimes even hard to, I was very impressed with parents helping parents. And they really, in fact, one of the face groups that Ms. Androsky's talking about went in a matter of 4 days from 12 people to over 1,012 people of just through word of mouth. And you had to request to get into this group. What was interesting was even they would have trouble sometimes helping one another because they'd be like, well, I don't understand the problem. And then you find out, oh, they were using a Kindle, or they were using an out-of-date Chromebook, or they were using an out-of-date iPad. And it was not a district-issued one, and we couldn't help them. We were at a loss because the best thing, and it became a common thing, parents even said, you know what, I went to the school, they found me a district-issued device, and I'm all set. Is it 100% perfect? It'll never be, just like no classroom, it will always be perfect. But it certainly gave us, I think, the most control, the most opportunities, and the most success for those students. I also think what you all are planning both going forward and that you'll share with us, these will be more essential now than ever because things that we're going to hear about in a second called Canvas, for example, are going to be an essential part of that. And if you don't know, when we started, we would say, well, if there was one device in that home, we would then say, can you get away with maybe just using one? The idea of trying to limit is what we had. But when you have a middle schooler trying to do their work, and they're saying to the elementary who says, I need to be on iReady, and the other one says, no, I need to be doing my English and math, then you have parents that were very frustrated going, okay, my kids are spending 10 hours a day trying to share one device back and forth with homework. So.
I think we've got enough information
Ms.
to
Mount.
proceed.
I've had a request from the public if you all would speak into your microphone. They can't hear y'all on TV.
Yes, ma'am.
That wasn't for me.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Well, moving on to the hot topic.
Can I just ask for clarification? So we will come back at the next board meeting with approval. Is the board looking for the lease option or the buy option?
Lease option.
Lease.
Lease option, okay.
And insurance. In return.
So we're looking for new microphones too.
Just in reference to Ms. Council, in reference to Ms. Council, so it doesn't include insurance, though, right? Is it just
No,
support?
they have, we offer.
No, but we'll bring you, if you ask us, we'll bring you a price for insurance for the year like we did before.
Yeah,
What we would hope to do by then is have some facts in where I can tell you what we paid for the last insurance and how much it would have cost if we didn't have the insurance. We can see if it's cost effective. So we could, because we bought insurance.
We bought insurance as a district, though, for.
Just for March. From March till August, we
Right.
bought insurance for just the elementary iPads.
Right.
So what we're working on is trying to come up with a cost on, here's how much the insurance cost us, and here's how much we had in repairs, so you can see it's worth it, or it wasn't worth it, which way. We'll be able to show you that cost analysis. So you can make a decision for the future.
Okay, so are you even suggesting that maybe the district would buy insurance then?
For the elementary, we can have that discussion, that's up to the board. We can have that, so we don't do it for the secondary. But
And we're not doing it We weren't doing it for third through fifth grade either in elementary.
We did, for anybody that we sent the iPads home with in March because,
Right, that
because
was-
they weren't used to taking them home.
But prior to March, we offered parents.
We didn't let them take it home in elementary, that's why.
Gotcha,
So, but once we needed the elementary kids to take them home, we made that decision to buy the insurance because again, you know, it's a little bit different scenario than a 16-year-old carrying the device home.
And I think if we, you can bring us that cost analysis, because I think, like you said, the reason we look to purchase it during the distance learning is because now the classroom, in-classroom devices now became take-home devices, and there was really no even opportunity to do that other than the way we did. I would say if we, in our plan that's coming up, that would be to me a consideration of cost that we're gonna have to look at, because otherwise these devices would be classroom devices, is I think the assumption at this point. And they would not become take-home devices unless we went to a distance learning situation.
Correct, and they're gonna talk about that in the plan. If they stay at school, it's not an issue, you're right.
Right.
But once they become a device that the kids are taking home, then that becomes the issue with the insurance piece.
Okay, so I would like to know though, in that, the number that we could trade, because I know a lot of enhancement councils have bought extra iPads, right, for the schools, and I guess they were used by K through second, right? So wouldn't there be some advantage, some trade-in value that we're gonna have on those devices if we're gonna buy every child?
If we were to trade some devices in, I don't know what.
I mean, how many, yeah, I kind of know the numbers.
So what we would have to do is we would have to identify the number of iPads that each school has by generation, and much like what we did with the buyback program before, they can give us a ballpark figure up front if everything was in pristine condition. Then they take them back, they put them through the testing, and they determine the value of those devices. What we are finding is that a good number of those iPads are now old and cannot be updated. I was speaking with an elementary school yesterday because they were trying to have iPads repaired that have zero value. It's an iPad 2 for reference, if you knew. And so, I mean, that is a struggle, is that they do have them, but they're older. And so, I was prepared to go to the school admin this summer and let them know that they need to start working on a plan for aging out those older ones, because we can't upgrade them, so a lot of the apps won't work on them anymore. But I will work on that.
And Mr. Kennedy, we'll keep looking to see if there is something that comes out directed for the equipment that wouldn't take away from the other areas.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, that was it. And I figured you were looking at that. That was really my question. Thank you, sir.
I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I just wanted to tell you all, to remind you all before Amy and Trish come up, that what they're presenting to you today is a draft, but it's also what we are dealing with today. And their recommendation today is on current status. Now, you know that there could be a 4 o'clock call today that we get notice at 3:30 that things have changed. So as we go through this, we are looking for your input. We're looking for some good, open, honest communication with this. You all know, and many of you have been involved, but I think we've got 50 people on that committee, close to 50 people. We've tried to include all stakeholders, and we're trying to get as many people together and on the same page as possible. So as we go through that today, it's open discussion. I would ask that maybe when they get through, they've got A, B, and C scenarios. Maybe if we can try to get through at least one of them. And then if you'll write your questions down, then we can come back, because they may be answered, but we don't want any of your questions to leave here today and not be answered, okay? And if I had a crystal ball for August the 10th, I would give each one of us one, but we don't have that. And even yesterday on my superintendent's call, and I apologize, I do have a superintendent's call at 1 o'clock today, because we're discussing some other things, but they're still looking for waivers from the state for some of the specifics about how we do attendance, how we're gonna get paid for attendance, different things like that. So, Superintendent Association, Joy Frank to be exact, feels good about some of their answers, but as usual, we don't have anything in writing. So I will turn that over to Trish and Amy, and we'll be done soon.
Tricia's giving you an updated version of our draft. If I pull this up.
Remember, guys, flexibility and consideration.
The only thing we know for certain is uncertainty itself. Started that way. So we have a lot of work that we want to share with you today, and we emailed all of you all the notes and all of the considerations thus far from our committee. So today our presentation involves just giving you a broad overview of our process that we have in place, our recovery committee. Then we want to talk to you about the options that we have been discussing. And then of course we want to get your input as well at moving forward. And once again, I want to preface this with it's a work in progress and it is a draft changing as we speak. So we have a recovery plan committee, as Mrs. Himmel mentioned, and we have literally about 50 people on this committee. We felt that that was very important because we have a variety of stakeholders that really view everything we do with a different lens. For example, we have teachers, we have a school nurse, we have the union on the committee, we have school-based leadership teams, we have district-level leadership team administrators, and we feel that they all bring a different piece to the puzzle. So that's why the committee is so large, and that was very important to us. So we also have guiding questions that we have utilized in order to begin developing our plans and to be able to discuss the various considerations, as you can imagine. We also have guiding principles for this committee, one being that we are preparing for change, not perfection. And we are also building trust, and we are spreading the authority to others because once again, we each have a different piece of the puzzle and everybody's viewpoint is very important. In addition, we also have a parent not only on our recovery plan committee, we also have a family engagement team that Mrs. Johnson, our Title I coordinator, is facilitating. We are working closely with parents from our community to get their input. We're talking about the successes and the challenges of our remote cares learning plan. We're also getting input moving forward of how we can enhance communication with our families and how can we get through this unprecedented time together. We have also surveyed parents. We have wanted to see how many would be interested in the Citrus virtual option and just to gauge what their safety concerns are right now. And we know that that could change next week, and we'll continue to gauge their comfort level moving forward. We also have various subcommittees that have branched off to work on, for example, choosing our virtual platform, our Citrus Virtual FLVS curriculum. We also have a subcommittee that worked on a learning management system that we would need to have in place moving forward with our remote learning cares plan. So if we needed to go to distance learning at any time, we would have one learning management system, which is Canvas, and we're going to talk more about that. So that's really just a broad overview of our process so far. We meet twice a week, every Tuesday, Thursday, first thing, and we meet for 2 hours. Once that 2 hours is up, we stop. Because as you can imagine, it is intense, it's aggressive, and as far as the timeline, and once you go through this for 2 hours, you have to take a break. So we usually provide homework. We have even more subcommittees from this group, and then they come back prepared for our next meeting to share out. So that's a broad overview. So now I want to talk about our enrollment options. We have put out there, as we discussed a little bit earlier this morning, that we are asking our families to commit to option 1, which is If school is open, August 10th, when our students return, traditional on-campus, brick and mortar, with, of course, additional safety and health measures put into place, which we will discuss. Part of option 1, if school is closed, if we have to shut down for any reason, we will go to distance learning and utilize Canvas as our learning platform. That is option 1. Option 2 would be, if school is open, I'm a parent, I've decided to enroll my child into Citrus Virtual. If school is closed, my child will still remain in Citrus Virtual. So that is option 2. Option 3 is more of a hybrid blended model. There are several models out there. Today we will share 4 models that we have discussed. And of course, if you all have any other models to suggest for us to explore, we're receiving your input today. These models really would be explored more in-depthly, in our opinion, if we had stricter guidelines to follow. So once again, it's not our recommendation for option 3, any of these models, but we want you to be aware of some models out there and get your input on others. So option 3, we'll share those 4 models we've explored, and if school is closed, distance learning with Canvas. So those are the 3 options we're going to discuss today, with us going in great depth with option 1. We also, this week, will have Mrs. Himmel share a video with our community and families. Our goal is to get it out this week. Let me phrase that. And just explaining these options and some of our work we've done with our recovery plan. And also, we have already started an FAQ that we will be releasing for our parents. We know that they have a lot of questions. We've been receiving those questions via social media and Let's Talk. So we've started compiling those and we will release those out, and we'll be gathering questions as well as we go along and trying to answer them the best we can.
But right, I got, oh, you want me?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Right now, the only option is option 1 or 2, because I still get all these questions about these plan models, and really that's not an option right now.
That is our recommendation, yes.
All right, okay.
But we wanted to share the models for option 3 that we discussed.
Yeah, we've looked at.
Yes.
We make pros and cons with it, and it's really because of the number of cons that are there is why we are not recommending it this time. They're not definite for the rest of the year. Next year, I think there are something that we might continue looking at, but at this time, it would not be feasible to do one of those options.
But like Ms. Himmel said, if things change,
Correct.
we can explore an option that we may be, I won't say forced, but we may have to.
Correct, and when you see those 4 options, those are really options that we were looking at and researching when the guidelines and restrictions were so, strict for things, but it's an open book.
And I think we need to remember these were also before yesterday's announcement from the Surgeon General of Florida, who is already be giving more guidelines. And I think that that's going to continue from now until August 10th. That makes staff's jobs so much more challenging, because I agree, what you're putting in front of us now is still only a microcosm of even the last time the group met, at the restrictions and information that you had at that moment. Which, again, from yesterday, your call this afternoon, attendance flexibilities are going to be huge. There are all pieces of here that are only as good as the limited information we have. And that is the number one challenge. We're a little bit unique in Florida. There are other states that have provided different opportunities and guidance. Ours has been more restrictive. And I think we need to remember too, this is still based on the state telling us we're dependent on what our local Department of Health tells us. And I can tell you, with speaking with districts around the state, there is not consistency of local departments of health from district to district in what they're suggesting in guidelines for school operations. So we are going to have our staff that's using the information they have regarding Citrus County, but there will be people that hear around the state variations that may differ because of guidance they're getting from their areas. So again, I'm appreciative to the staff, but I wanted our board to understand it's gonna vary all the way through this.
Over the years I've been here, Dr. Tito and the health department have been pretty good partners with our schools, so I'm sure if we have any questions or if they have information that they think we need, it's gonna be a two-way. I agree with you. I listen to a health person before I listen to a politician.
Well, and I'd like to add to that because I'm on the phone with Tito a lot. But he will not go up against what DOE's recommendations are.
I don't think we would either.
So, but you're right, so we've been in contact with them a lot.
I think it's just, I was gonna say this, but since you brought that up, I think that it would be helpful to this board at an upcoming meeting to have him and the department come forward and give a presentation.
I think it's a good idea.
Because I think that there's a lot of questions we're all having on that, and again, I feel poor staff because you're only able to make decisions on the information you're provided. And when there's such difficulty sometimes getting those guidelines, I feel for you, and I feel for you having to just present to us, so I'm sorry, but I'll let you.
It's, everything is ambiguous right now, and it's really difficult when you live in the land of certainty. You know, you just do the best, it's true.
Yes.
And you do the best you can, you know. So I'm going to go ahead and let Mrs. Crowell come up and begin to talk about option 1.
Yes, so we are going to talk about option 1 in more depth than option 2 and 3. Our recovery committee has, like Trish said, on Tuesdays and Thursdays have met for 2 hours at a time, and really it started off as more of like a brainstorming type session where it was just putting out all considerations just out there and then organizing them and discussing them further as we went, talking about what considerations would cost us money versus what considerations would not. So you do have in front of you the multiple page, I think it's like a 10-page document, where it's the entire list of considerations that we have made as a recovery committee for the traditional model, the on-campus model. On the left is if students were on campus, that's if schools were open. And then the column on the right is if schools were closed, what would be the considerations we needed to think of for distance learning to occur with the Canvas model. So that's why you have 2 columns there. One on the left is talking about the traditional in-house and going on campus. What kind of additional safety and health measures do we need to put into place for that to be a safe environment for our students to actually return into the brick and mortar on August 10th. So as you can see, we did have quite a few considerations there that we have talked about. And for each one of those, the traditional, on-campus, and the distance learning, we grouped our considerations into 3 categories. One, we looked at what are the operational considerations, and then what are the academic considerations, and then finally, what are the student and family and support, staff support considerations that we need to think of. So, kind of grouping them into those 3 elements really kind of helped us target our conversations more effectively. So some examples that we have, I mean, of course, all of our considerations are trying to really do 3 major things. One, they're trying to reduce physical interactions as much as possible, try to also reduce large group gatherings, and of course enhance all the safety and health measures throughout our schools. That's in the cafeterias, on the playgrounds, in the classrooms, as well as our school buses. So some examples of those, we're not going to go over every single one on that list that you have in front of you, but you do have that. But some examples that we have for, say, the operational considerations were encouraging hand washing before and after all activities. We're going to be providing hand sanitizer that is CDC recommended to all staff and students throughout the campuses and on the buses. Putting signage throughout the school that is reminding students of, honestly, even in elementary, how to wash your hands properly, proper hygiene. We are going to have face masks, however, they will be recommended but not mandated. That is, as of today, that is what we are saying with face masks. We are asking for our schools to look at what furniture do we have in our classrooms that are non-essential furniture that we could possibly move out to create more space in our classrooms.
Excuse me, can we just, and I
The face
apologize,
masks?
but yeah, and only because I'm in agreement with what the recommendation is, but I think, and maybe you all have had the same thing on the board, I'm getting phone calls in 2 different directions.
Correct, and we saw that in the parent survey.
And-
We saw that in
and
the
you
parent
see
survey.
that
Half of them do not want their child to go there if they have to wear a mask. The other half is the opposite. They will only go if masks are mandated. So there is that, you've got both sides
And
of
they're
it.
very passionate on both sides. And I think we all, our position has been, we have to respect individual families, but we have to address all the needs as best we can to provide those options. So I think while staff is recommending, and I apologize when I say staff, I hope you all know, I say that with the most big heart love, but is appropriately saying, we recognize the right and the ideal that families will want to wear that, and I'm assuming that along with staff as well. And at the same time, we are not mandating it because there are families and staff that are saying, no, that is, it's not simply uncomfortable, I don't feel comfortable for my health to make that choice. And our position, I believe, is we're trying to accommodate as many as we possibly can. Is that correct, Ms. Hemmel? And I say that just because I know when you say we're not recommending it at this time.
We're recommending them, we're just not mandating.
We're recommending them, we're not mandating them. I just want, it's not like that's just a flippant that we've gotten there by not looking at the data, looking at the information. Even the state of Florida right now is recommending and not mandating. There are cities that are looking at that for various reasons, but that's a separate issue than what the school system is, so.
And we are prioritizing measures that are known as more effective. For example, the washing of your hands before and after is definitely known by both sides as probably the #1 way to fight or to not contract the disease. So, we're definitely putting in measures that prioritize the most effective methods. And the washing and good hygiene and so forth, we have been told is definitely the #1 way to stay safe. But of course, not eliminating the face masks because they can also help as well.
And maybe this is a question for Mr. Bradshaw, but I just read where Hillsborough, I think yesterday, just went to mandatory mask. I know several other counties have that. What if that were to happen? Is Hillsborough bound, is their school district bound by that ordinance?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think that's in public places, but the counties and cities don't have control over school districts. We have home rule of what we do.
And that was by the way, that the answer that they said is the attorneys weren't sure and they thought they were gonna ask the county and city for an exemption because they really didn't have home rule. I mean, they have home rule.
We have home rule, so I would imagine that if the city came in and said it was mandatory, that's for city government, places that the city governs, or the county governs. If you made me give you an answer right now.
No,
I'd say
I'm
we have
not,
home
I'm just,
rule, but it's-
I'm just thinking about that, but I would be somewhat hard pressed if our county commission passed a rule that required face masks
I think that's gonna be brought up today.
that we would not go against that. That's, something that we're gonna have to consider, the legality of it too, but I guess maybe it's home rule right now. We could choose not to, but that would.
We would need to discuss that.
It would be surprising at this stage if the commission, I think, would mandate, in Citrus County. But I think that it's definitely worth, and I don't think we're gonna be the only ones that are the canary on this, so.
I'll make a note.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry but I felt like face mask, I know is
I know that's a big- I
it's
knew
a big
that's
issue, so I figured that we can move on
And
now.
I did
We
kind of
have
just
that.
put it in there in the middle of a
Yes,
lot of
ma'am.
others.
The flip side of that
Not on purpose.
is when we say, when we accept a mandate instead of a choice by the kids, we're gonna put another monkey on a teacher's back to monitor masks in the classroom. And what are you gonna do with a kid who doesn't have it or his mask is broken? And I'm gonna say right now, these teachers have done a fantastic job, but we don't need to make them on mask control.
And that'd be bus drivers too.
Bus drivers too, yeah,
Yeah.
if at all possible.
We are talking about limiting field trips to internal sites only. So at the Marine Science Station would be that internal site that we're referring to. And again, this is just reducing physical interactions that don't need to be, or large group gatherings that don't need to be. In our cafeterias, we're looking at utilizing a touchless barcode scanning system, when they are getting their food. So we're not having to worry about that pin pad being sanitized or whatever, which is really exciting. Recess for our elementary. I know that we get a lot of questions right now. Are our kids able to do recess? As of today, yes, we do. We're still scheduling recess, but we are looking at designating certain playground areas for certain groups so that we can reduce the interaction. Looking at our staggering schedules, of course, so that not so many students are out at one time. So that would be with our administrators looking at that master schedule. We will be communicating virus exposure self-reporting procedures for families, staff, and students via signage, newsletters, informing them that if your child is sick or is showing symptoms of this, stay home and what to do about it. We do have a return to work plan that our HR department has put out that we will be referring to for procedures regarding staff self-reporting of health risks. So that will be important as well. On the bus, we are trying to, of course, enhance all of our measures regarding safety and health with cleaning and so forth in between routes. But when seating students, trying to have students from the same household, in the same seat as much as possible. Like that would make sense. This is a lot of things that we say, okay, what would make sense and help at the same time.
When we're on this one, let me interrupt, it might be in later pages, but we had to close down WTC when they had a COVID case on campus. If we have a COVID case on any of our schools, are we gonna have to close down for a couple of days to sanitize?
We give the recommendation.
We do, we have a decision tree with that.
What we'll do is we'll take that part of the campus at this point in time. DOE says you don't necessarily have to close down the whole campus. But that part that has been exposed, we're going to let it sit for 24 hours. Then we will activate our rapid response team to go in. We have designated staff members who will be undergoing specific training for COVID, disinfecting after COVID. They will go in, they will clean the campus that was disinfected. We'll notify the health department, we'll notify the Department of Education pursuant to the guidelines of the Department of Education provided.
So at the elementary school level,
We'll let it sit
it would be
24
just
hours.
one classroom.
Yeah.
High schools would be a little bit different. They float.
But, Mr. Bishop, that's about the physical building.
That's right.
I think the bigger question that a lot of us are asking is what happens to those that now either have been exposed to someone who's tested positive? How is that impacting now those individuals? And then there's the issue of contact tracing and how that gets impacted.
That's why we're gonna bring Tito to the board workshop, because that way he can explain how they do it, because I know that if anyone is identified as a confirmed COVID case, that goes to the health department. No matter where they are in the state, that goes back to our health department. And then they contact the people who you have said, I've been around for 15 minutes, direct contact. So, he's got a scenario for a lot of these cases that I think would be good.
Because I think the question is who makes that case? What is the protocol of how long they're out for? And then the next piece you're going to talk about is the learning, because there's continuity of learning. So, because when we're talking about this option one in a traditional environment, the reality I think that we know of is when that happens, if we're having pockets of this, we have distant learning that happens irrespective or regardless of what happens about whether we go to a full distance learning. We'll be having distance learning that will be potentially continuous throughout our school year in some form or another, which is I know where you're going to talk about the academic plan. So I think that really does need to be something that we have to understand, and then understand what are the communication protocols. And Mr. Bradshaw knows up here.
No, I think it's a Department of Health problem, and I think information sharing will be scarce. I have reached out to other districts, trying to see if there's any type of an agreement. I don't think I've found anyone who's entered into an agreement with the Department of Health to share that information. I think it gets turned as of right now, it gets turned over to them and we just sit.
But then the question that I hope we can have some comfort in is if we are aware of that, and in a hypothetical situation, if we are made somehow aware, whether self-reporting or by DOH, what then happens if DOH is not going to give direction? Because we're still in a position to have to make a decision. I should say we. The superintendent will then have to make an operational decision, and it is, I think a lot of the state has been under the impression that local departments of health will be providing us a great deal of guidance. And I would have thought that, and I hope that that's the case, because that's what we're all using as our plans. But that's only as good as that information and being there when we have school days and at 10 o'clock in the morning, a child says, my mom's got COVID, and we haven't been informed of that. That becomes now an action that then will have to follow some method of exploratory. And that's where I say, I would like to say we could depend on the Department of Health. I'm hoping we're going to be able to depend on that. But I hate the idea that the superintendent is left there not having that information yet.
I think if we get limited information coming out of the Department of Health in regard to if that happens and we report it to the Department of Health, I don't know if we're going to get much information back out of them as it stands right now.
Mr. Bradshaw, I'll give you a real life scenario because I'm on the COC calls now twice a week, because every day. But there was an entity in the county, and they are not DOH is not obligated, like one of you had it, they are not obligated to call us to tell us, as of today. They are, Tito can clear this up, but I do not think they are obligated to call us and tell us that we have COVID-19 on any of our campuses or any of our buildings.
And that's difficult, Mr. Bradshaw, then, if the obligation we have is the safety and security of our students, and the general impression out there is that CDC guidelines say that you would have self-quarantining for 14 days, and we don't have we don't have that ability to do contact tracing. We don't have even the HIPAA authority to be able to have that information.
Right.
So we are very codependent on the Department of Health in order to provide that safety. So I think we definitely have got to work through some of that, because all of our plans are dependent on the Department of Health.
Yes.
And our safety is so dependent. And I know we're not unique, Citrus County is not unique in this, but it's our community. And we have to protect our kids, our staff, and I think these plans are amazing, but we don't know whether distant learning is going to happen the first week in one of our classrooms at this point. And if that happens, staff needs to be able to, I think, have that information, that the superintendent can get that information and it filter down to administration, and there is then, process that takes place. Because I think that's the most realistic scenario that we're going to be under day one we open up.
Well, I think that even if we don't get any information out of the Department of Health, there will be telltale signs, all of a sudden the whole class is gone. And then, you can have the administration start reaching out to, because they can tell you, if I called your house and I said, why isn't your son in school? And you say, because I tested positive and now we're self-quarantining, we're not obligated. So, they can obviously, the information can be shared that way. It's not, I don't know if there's going to be a good solution to it.
Because we will have students that as we know, the fastest form of communication is with the students right now. So the students will come in, they'll know of a situation, and if we have half the class out, we're in the challenge of, so then what do we do with the other half of the class? And I'm saying, what is our obligation to the health and wellness of that class? you know, with regards to that, you know, and then there's the issue of how we provide continuity of instruction. They can't hear you, Ms. Powers.
So you can't keep information out of community disease in a classroom to other people. How does this vary from that rule?
We have had sick children in our schools for years. This COVID is new, but we've had kids hospitalized, and we've distanced learning them, you know, even in paper. I'm just concerned about if we have any responsibility for sanitizing our schools. We've always had sick kids. Some of these kids are asymptomatic, and they don't even know they've got it. And their symptoms are not as severe as somebody that's my age. I'm not getting
Mr. Bradshaw, I don't want to leave this conversation though, without saying, we've been in close contact with DOH and Tito and them. I mean, we have a lot of conversations with them. I know that they do their content. I know they're very low on how many staff members they have. But I do know if I was to get it, then I give them a list and they contact each one of those people. They may tell me to stay home 14 days, but they may test all of you and send you back to work tomorrow if you're negative. So they do have protocols and processes in place. And I just think it'd be a great conversation for Tito to be here to say what he can do, can't do, and what he's obligated to do and not. I don't know if we'll put you at ease anymore.
My
At least
concern is
you'll
just that I
know
don't
where
want
we
to
go,
close
where
the
we go
school
from there.
if there's just one case, and then we've got to be required to clean it, but maybe that's our prerogative, but I don't want to keep
Well, we'll
sending
bring him.
kids.
Yeah, because Ms. Counts, I'm not sure though that may not be the case.
Yeah, that's right.
Because right now, you have a superintendent in Pasco County that's contracted it, and it's changed their operations. You have a school board member in Hillsborough County that contracted it, it's changing their operations. If a teacher is exposed to somebody, you know, and that happens, if a bus driver is, we have to have some understanding of what is going to be that protocol, because otherwise the entire plan that our staff's worked on is predicated on continuity of instruction. And if we don't know even what's going to happen from day to day, how do they move fluidly in and out of that?
Well, and you'll notice also in each one of these options, you'll see it's if school, and you'll notice the parentheses S, is because it could be just one school versus all schools opening or closing at a time. And like you said, it could even be an area of a school, a wing of a school. But one of the things that I know that we have talked about as a committee regarding if a student or staff member are exhibiting symptoms while they're on campus, we are talking about designating an isolation area separate from the clinic, where, you know, students of course would go to the clinic, possibly even to, you know, get medications or things like that, but we recognize that having a separate area that's isolated for students that are, or staff members that are exhibiting symptoms of this can definitely be at, while we of course contact parents and so forth to come and get them. But we would, if we actually have a diagnosis of COVID, we have in our plan that there's a decision tree that we do have that we will be following, and it's coordinated with the local health department, like you were saying, that they assess the risk, of course, is like the first thing that is done no matter what, assessing that risk. And then how are we going to communicate, who are we going to notify, or who are they going to notify, all of that is part of that decision tree, I know that we have. We also talked about having signage at all the entrances, asking visitors, whoever they are. Granted, we are talking about limiting visitors as well to campuses that are non-essential visitors or non-essential volunteers that do not need to be there, limiting those visiting our schools. But for those that do need to be there, having signage at the entrances, notifying them to stop. I know you've seen them probably at many restaurants and so forth, and asking them to only enter if they do not have the listed symptoms that are on the sign. You know, things like that we are posting as well by the first day at school. You want to go over some of the academic considerations?
Okay, so we talked briefly this morning in regards to diagnostic assessment. So we know that essentially we're going to have to get a year and a half in this upcoming school year. It is crucial that we look back and review our curriculum maps very carefully, depending on the content area, and look back at those standards that they may have missed. The diagnostic assessment in the elementary schools will be utilizing iReady. The schools are very familiar, the teachers are very comfortable now with iReady. As soon as we begin back, we've already set our window and we'll take that diagnostic assessment, and then the teacher will review that information and adjust instruction accordingly. Secondary students and teachers will be utilizing USA Test Prep. They will immediately, upon coming back, give that diagnostic assessment, and then they will be utilizing that information to drive their instruction as well. I know that schools are already meeting as departments, and I can speak briefly for Citrus High School. I know that they're meeting for ELA and math next week. They're looking at their curriculum maps, and they're already starting to develop plans of how they're going to diagnose the needs of their students and adjust their instruction. We also will have progress monitoring tools in place. We will utilize our Citrus assessments. We will continue with iReady to monitor the progress, and of course USA Test Prep achieved 3,000 in the secondary world for ELA. And is it math too that we're doing, or is it just ELA for Achieve 3000 to monitor for intensive?
For intensive, Achieve math for
Okay, thank you. So Achieve for middle school math, and then Achieve 3000 to monitor progress for our intensive reading students in the secondary, 6 through 12. We also will make sure that our professional learning communities are very focused and targeting those standards and looking at the deficiencies and providing remediation and enrichment. You know, often sometimes our teachers will meet together to go over agenda meeting type items. It will be crucial for our schools to make sure that our conversations are very targeted and focused on student achievement and making those gains. We will also utilize Canvas, and Canvas is our new learning management system. So we're going to be talking about that when we talk about our distance learning plan. So we did have a committee that met, and we reviewed several learning management systems, and Canvas was the learning management system that our committee has chosen. And we are in the process of developing a professional development plan, because we know that our teachers need to learn this yesterday. We know that. So Mrs. White-Taylor is working on developing a plan for teachers to come in before school starts, and we will also compensate accordingly.
Yes, do y'all check with other school systems when you go to
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And one district that we've looked at very closely is Pasco County, and they've utilized Canvas for several years. They have a franchise for FLVS. They also utilize Canvas, and they've also created some curriculum to place in Canvas. Now, they've utilized Canvas for over 3 years. So, you know, they've been using it. But yes, we reached out to other districts to see what tools they were using.
So we can know the weaknesses of the system and the strength.
Absolutely.
And for clarification, Canvas is the learning management system, but it is not curriculum.
Correct. It is just...
And I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding because we love Canvas. And those of us who are LMS people, we love Canvas. It is, I think, the right tool. So I apologize, but yes.
So Canvas is just the platform. You know, one of the things that our parents were very concerned about were the various platforms we were using to push out curriculum. So this will be the tool that we will utilize to place our curriculum on. We'll also utilize it in the classroom. I have not used Canvas personally. I know, is Kathy Androsky here? Okay. She is very familiar with Canvas and could talk more about it. Lecanto High School has utilized Canvas a lot, and I know there are some teachers familiar with it. But they can utilize that tool in their classroom, and if we have to go to distance learning, they can utilize that at home as well.
Will, because of the integration now of Canvas, will that be used in the classroom? Is that the expectation that it'll be used just as proficiently, let's say, as Skyward, which I know it connects with, to deliver lessons so that they are ready in that
Yes,
that.
that would be the expectation moving forward, and once again, knowing that that professional development piece is crucial, and to provide that support.
I saw something that I thought was great as part of your plan in here, and that was the potential of having Wi-Fi hotspots on buses for distance learning. But it does bring up a huge component that Canvas has, and that is that on the iPads, the student can download work, whether this is regular work or distance learning. They can download the work at school, the lessons, the information. They can go home and not have Wi-Fi access, do that work on their iPad, come back to school, and it'll automatically sync and deliver those lessons to the teacher. And they can work offline. Thank you. That was exactly it. And that's a huge piece that we know was a challenge with going to distant learning. It also is a challenge that we've talked about even in our one-to-one deployment over the last number of years, is what do we do when a student goes home and they may not have consistent Wi-Fi? They may have Wi-Fi, but it may not be consistent. So I think this is, again, a reason why Canvas is really the right tool. Not all LMSs, and an example of that is Google Classrooms, which is used by some people as an LMS, does not have that ability. If you go home and don't have the internet, you don't have access to your Google Drive and your Google Lessons and your information, or you may not. So Canvas is exceptional, I think, in that. Do we happen to know if it integrates with Zoom at all? It does. That's what I thought it did.
It has, we've been using Canvas to run our reading endorsement and ESOL endorsement courses. So we've been building courses in it for professional development purposes. Up to now, we've used a free version. So the version we'll be using has many more bells and whistles, and it's actually easier to use than what we've been trying to create. But Zoom, there is a feature of Zoom. There's also another conferencing of the big blue button, which is another conferencing tool that's available that's very Zoom-like, that's within the platform too.
And that's going to be enormously helpful, whether, again, if we had to go to distance learning, or even just in providing flexibility of if we had a temporary remote classroom study. I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's ask two questions. How does the Wi-Fi hotspot work on the bus? What brings on the bus? And secondly, right downtown, I always said that there were spots of the Wi-Fi. I have never seen.
Oh, they are. I've found them.
Where are they?
Actually, you can download an app that helps you with it. The beauty of those MiFi spots or Wi-Fi spots is they would connect just like they would if they were at home and they were trying to get onto the internet. And I'm sure in those cases we would have signage that tells the hookup of it. But really the benefit is if we did find ourselves in a remote learning, it would allow them, they could get their lunch, they could download their new lessons, upload their new lessons, and that could be remote down into their classroom. We're hoping we don't have to do that, but I think that's a really huge piece of this that I thought was good, and it ties into the day-to-day operation use of Canvas and the potential use of if we had to. So
it also benefits, excuse me, Mrs. Powers.
To give you places on.
I can do that.
It's right by the fire station, unless I have to climb on the roof.
Well, do you have Spectrum? Spectrum Wi-Fi hotspots are out there too, if you're a Spectrum subscriber at home. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the big advantages, because I remember the same presentation on Canvas when we adopted it, was that we can create our own curriculum. That's why we did just 1 year with buying curriculum this year. But the teachers will spend this year also downloading our own curriculum in the classroom. I thought that was a big plus because that sick kid doesn't miss a day in the classroom with this Canvas, and I thought that was a really big plus.
It will be interesting to me to see the cost of the Wi-Fi hotspots on the buses and how that technology is going to work and fit in with our current plan. Of course, we've moved away from, or moving into our own hardwire network, right? So I'm just kind of curious on those costs, but I guess that'll be something that we'll have next month, you think, or what's the outlook on that? Because we need to have those up, we need to have those moving relatively quickly, right, for our buses and coordinating that.
I think that was only in the extent if we went to a distant learning. It wasn't the hotspots were only if we went to, where if we went into a shelter-in-place distant learning. They wouldn't be part of an opening plan.
Yeah, I asked Mr. Fletcher to research the cost feasibility of getting the equipment to make our buses hotspot compatible. He's got that information. I don't know if he's here in the building or not. I can step out and see if he's here, that he can maybe be able to share with you. The purpose for that was this: if we're going to find ourselves in a long-term distance learning situation, we know there's areas within our community that does not receive internet access, and we wanted to make sure we could accommodate those kids. So we did it just as a pilot. It seemed to work relatively well from what I can understand, and certainly we can get that information as far as the cost analysis of it. Okay. I'll see if he's here.
And back to Canvas, I also wanted to just share that this will benefit our high school students when they go to college, because most, if not all, of our colleges utilize Canvas as a learning management tool. I know CF definitely does, and I believe UF does. So this is a move in the right direction, we feel. Before I move on, are there any other questions regarding academic considerations? I'm going to move to student, family, and staff support considerations, and I'm looking at Ms. Humbach because I may need her to come up here and discuss the well check tool that will be utilized. The BASC and the BEST.
Is there any remaining questions that Ms. Androwski could answer regarding Canvas
Who saw it?
or hotspots for Mr. Fletcher?
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, how many of our buses will become hotspots? I mean, do we?
Ms. Farmer's working on that right now, trying to get a number for Lance, but we're early on in that process. But once we identify that, we can provide that to you.
Okay. And you're getting some prices on how that.
Yeah, so we went out for cost. You know, we developed our own system, and it came in right about $1,000 for each bus. There are companies out there that do specialize in this, and they were quite a bit more, about, I think they were around $1,600 to $2,000 per bus. We did pilot it on one bus, but the weather was not great, so I'm not sure. I tried to get the transportation to figure out how many people were actually, if any students actually did use it in their experience. We did go out on the first couple days, tested it, verified everything was working, had signal. They were able to get out on the internet and access what they needed to access, and we kind of hung around for a little while, but they didn't have any students that did show up at that time.
And what's the range on one of those from a radius?
So, do you have a, like, TRC parking lot?
Yes.
We had it set up in the center of the parking lot, and I was all the way over to the maintenance department behind the TRC, and I still had a signal. So it is a very large range that you can access. And Cliff Henderson was on site with Aaron Piazza, and they both said that the signal was much better and faster when it was in the actual school bus. So I guess the extra power helped out.
That's good. Thank you.
Physically, I'm sorry.
No,
Physically, how do you do that? With you all in the back, I can't see you. I've got your eyes in the back of my head.
It's fine.
So we have like a router that we purchase, and we get a Verizon, basically a SIM card from Verizon that provides the cell signal. It gets that signal from the cell towers and then converts it into data.
And what's the broadcast?
It goes into that little router that we purchase. And then we have an access point that we hook to it that then produces the Wi-Fi for them to connect to.
Mr. Fletcher, does it allow, at that point, is it within our network VPN system as well, or do they still go through that login process, or are they basically as if they were on campus?
They don't have a direct connection to our network, but they are still filtered by our forwarding line.
So do they have to, though, does the device have to look for, I mean, do you have to choose the device like they would at home if they're going to that, or does it automatically, as if they're on campus, it recognizes they're on the
No, yeah, they would have to connect to, and that's something we could probably push out with our mobile device management.
And just do that,
And then just push it out to them, so when they are on site and they do see that plus signal, they can connect to it.
It's a world we haven't had to think about, so it's enormous. And Mr. Bishop, thank you for even piloting it so that we could find, because we hope we don't ever have to go and use those pieces, but if we did, that's the difference of the way we do, we were having to deliver instruction with 1 day notice in the spring, and how we can deliver, a continuity of high caliber instruction if we have to go to this again. So thank you, Mr. Fletcher.
We know that the mental health of our families and teachers and staff will be very important when we come back. So I want Ms. Humbaugh just to talk about the support system we'll have in place.
Good afternoon. One of the things that we have in the plan is, maybe you all remember, actually it was when we first started with the mental health allocation plan, where we purchased the BESS, which is a tool to assess a student's social, emotional, kind of what their needs are. So we are planning on using that again this year, where it can either be done, like a student can, ask to be assessed with that. A parent can ask for a student to be assessed with the tool, or a teacher can make a recommendation for a student to be tested. It's not, I shouldn't really call it a test. It's more of like a self-assessment where, something like, how many days a week do you think that you feel sad, or things like that, of just getting their mental well-being and just how they are mentally. And as we know, maybe I shouldn't say many, but a number of these students will come back to our schools with having been, some of them have seen a lot in the last couple of months and have been exposed to many different things, and it has definitely will have affected some of their social emotional stability. So that's one thing that we have in place. It will be an opt-out. If they will have to opt out as to whether or not, if they don't want this at all, they will have to notify the schools, and it will be opting out. Other than that, we will be doing this, just this baseline assessment on students. Okay? Any questions about that? Another thing that the schools are doing, actually that they've already started to do, are providing monthly positive mental health flyers and notifications to parents, just ways that engaging with your child, especially when we were doing it with the distance learning, but now just some tips and suggestions and recommendations of helping their students get acclimated again back into the school setting. Counselors have developed, they're developing and have developed systems where students that are in need of support, or maybe they're struggling, whether it was from struggling with some issues at home or struggling getting back into the school system, where a student can send like a private notice to a school counselor or to the school social worker, and then there's a totally separate one for a school administrator so that they can be seen. It's a very simple, in many of the schools, in a Google Doc, where they put in a message in through their iPad. They say maybe something like, they check on there, I'm having a hard time today, I'm sad. There's several little things that they can choose. And the counselors and the social workers have immediate constant access to these messages that are pushed through, And the student will rate on there, I need to be seen immediately, this is not urgent, so that they can prioritize them. It has worked out beautifully, and it's something that we are continuing to do, so that especially those students who are kind of afraid of the face-to-face, you know, Miss Powers, I really need to talk to you, but they will do it through an iPad and see somebody that way. Okay? And lastly is our character education, which in elementary, you have heard us speak before of Sanford Harmony, which is, it is K through 5. We have implemented that in the classrooms, where the two basic, most important, I guess, activities that are with Sanford Harmony are the buddy up, where it's teaching them to be accepting of others, looking out for others, even if it's not your best friend, just being aware of others and how others are feeling. And so there's the buddy system, and then they also have a daily meetup where they set goals for the day. It's about listening to each other, accepting each other, which is also one of those support systems for students coming back who, you know, some of them, they've lost some of their social skills. And then at the middle school, we have School Connect, which we brought that to you last year. It was part of the mental health allocation that is in all all four of the middle schools, excuse me. And that not only encompasses the social emotional learning, but also the, you know, the social skills and the support for students, as well as the other part with the counselors, you know, with the iPads, them putting messages through to see a counselor. And then lastly, at high school also doing the iPad thing, but they have character education that goes back to when we really came up with Citrus County's character education plan back to 2016. That covers about 7 or 8 principles like leadership. It talks about social skills, internet safety, all of those types of things. But again, the main thing, the social skills, getting readjusted for those students that are coming back and giving them support.
Ms. Humboldt, when we went to distance learning, there was kind of a toolkit that the teachers were provided in the care package, I believe, that basically was like links, resources of who they could maybe refer their students to if they, including guidance. But is that something either we can or are providing as our students go back? Because I know that was very helpful to teachers to feel like if they were talking to one of their students and they were saying, you know, I'm just sad or I'm just this, that there was kind of something they could pull up quickly and say, you know what, there's this and there's this, you know, and I'll talk to your guidance counselor, you know, and do that. I think that was very helpful.
Yes, and that is something we will continue. And Ms. Greco has been working on a lot of those resources for teachers, just to be able, like what you're talking about, to feel like they can comfortably talk to a student and get them, you know, moving in the right direction or seeing the right person. We have that. We also have the list for mental health providers when students need additional help outside of the school. That's very prevalent out there. The schools have that. We sent that out on the school bus routes that were delivering food during the summer for parents to also have those. We made flyers with little tips for them. So yes, that is something we will definitely continue, as well as the social emotional professional development that is for teachers.
The other thing that brings up is probably the call I get the most anxiety from is our staff. They're stressed too. They're worried about coming back, not just necessarily about, you know, being COVID positive, but just this has been a stressful time for them too, and they've done so much for our kids. You know, where are we looking at for them? And I know that may not be entirely your department, but that's a question that I know, I've been hearing Ms. Powers in my mind all the time of what are we doing for our staff? Because if our staff is not feeling good, then we know they can't help our students the way we need. So
Conversely, if our staff is feeling good,
our students are, correct. Well said.
Yeah, that's a question I've had.
It's
Personally, it's, I'm going to have one sewn in Permanent head whisperer. It's concerned me, and I really want to see this happen sometime in the near future, is that we have a person, or persons, who can, the staff, teachers can access and talk with when they have concern. I don't know how to put it now, is function, that, you know, the thing that they put in where you can take it. and have
The
appointments and
telehealth?
stuff, yeah.
Mm.
But I really would like something, and Sam, I have it typed up to bring to you later, but, something where the teachers and the staff could have someone to go and talk to. And right now, it's really sort of simple topic about the COVID, but there are other topics too that are caused by all of the stress. And it doesn't require 6 months therapy, it just requires talking to someone and clarifying and sort of seeing where you are and let them help you find a place, give the list that you're talking about to go find something to. But someone in the school system who is available, and I don't think they would feel embarrassed or anything else if it's something like we're dealing with right now. So, and I think a lot would want it.
Okay, and most of you know, or many of you probably know, Ms. Powers is passionate about that. But yes, currently we do have the telehealth that is part of, through risk management. They would be better able to answer the, you know, how many actually utilize that. But you bring up a very good point, and the teachers have not been forgotten. I mean, that is something that we continue to look at. Our social workers do a really good job of providing tips and mindfulness and positive mental health type resources and suggestions to teachers. We have many teachers that do go to social workers and counselors just for somebody to talk to. But yes, I mean, that, like I said, we're looking into that, and it's certainly not something that has gone you know, unnoticed. And we'll continue to work on that and have something that will get us started to bring them back and make them, you know, have a smooth transition, just like the students.
Thomas, thanks for bringing it up.
Oh, no, it's you. It's just, our staff, this has been as tough for them as it has been on our students.
Very.
And some of their spouses have lost jobs. Some of their, you know, their families have been sick, and we don't want to forget them in this process, because they are the ones, as Ms. Bryant said, they're the ones watching out for our kids.
Yeah, they are. And just one other little thing, just kind of on a little side note, I do have to say that everything that at least I saw, and I know many of you did, with Staff Appreciation Week, the things that our schools did to appreciate their teachers and their staff was a very good ending, so to speak, of a very difficult year for everyone. And if you didn't get to see any of that, I mean, there were pictures and things like that Lindsay Blair had posted on social media and on our website, and so, you know, we might have to do that again for when they return, because they were very special, well thought out, you know, little celebrations.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else?
Okay, so we basically, the committee did the same process that we just did for traditional on campus if schools are open. with distance learning, because remember, if a school or schools close, we would do distance learning with option 1. So we again looked at the operational considerations for distance learning, what would be the academic considerations, and then again the student, family, and staff support considerations for it. Remember that ultimately the idea of this is that in the future we are going to be creating a recovery plan utilizing all of the considerations that are in that packet in front of you. Today we're kind of just going over some of them, but you have the exhaustive list right in front of you for all of the considerations. So what we did for the distance learning is we looked at the plan we already created last spring when we had to create that plan very quickly. So we definitely had some revisions to do to it to make it even better. We started off by just talking about what successes and challenges we had over the spring when revising that Citrus Cares plan. And there were definitely some positives that we would want to continue if we had to go to distance learning. One being how our food was transported, how we served so many of our families. And so we would definitely want to continue that process and how we did that. There were some other things we would want to utilize, of course, that one system, that one learning management system. We heard that loud and clear from our parents, that having that one system is very important, as well as communication as well, how they're being communicated from their teachers. Am I going into this app or am I going into this app? Am I going into Skyward Family Access to get an email? Am I, those kinds of things, trying to consolidate that and make it through one platform. So utilizing Canvas management system with all students and staff, providing training during our summer on tools helpful in implementing, not just of course Canvas, but just implementing distance learning, period. There are, it's a different way of teaching. It is not the same, and if you are not trained in that way, it doesn't just come natural to most. So we definitely wanted to include and implement some distance learning activities or some training on how to teach distance learning activities, and one of them was we actually offered 6 Tech Tuesdays over the summer, which I think all the sessions were full. Actually, everybody signed up for them to where they actually even added some other things because it was so well attended, which is awesome. And these are teachers during the summer, wanting some, just some ideas and still wanting to learn throughout the summer, which is, is wonderful. Again, one of the other things is that for our distance learning, we wanted to recommend, which we did earlier today, to the board to purchase K-2 devices. We are also talking about allowing, starting this year, 3rd through 5th to take their devices home on a daily basis for numerous reasons. For distance learning really to work, just last spring, we didn't know, Friday we left and we didn't return. So we had to then come up with a system for our students to then come and get all their devices. Well, if we have our 3rd through 5th taking their devices home, we wouldn't have that necessarily happening. If we had to close school, say, that day, we would have less having to come back to the campus to pick up their devices if they are able to take them home.
And Mr. Bowen, that probably goes back to that question of then maybe if that's what we're looking to do, we want to maybe offer the insurance to those families so that we can mitigate some of those losses. Because if that is, and I think that's a great suggestion, it's just a piece of that we might want to consider.
And I believe number 9, like in your packet there, we do have review data to determine if districts should purchase insurance for all devices. We have that in red, being that would be a cost, but that definitely is on our considerations packet there. Did you see it there, number 9 on the right? Okay.
Yeah, the economics of that is a challenge. I can certainly see why we did for devices that we don't normally would have sent home.
Mm-hmm.
But if the expectation is we're doing that, just like there's an obligation of a textbook and other materials that you have, then I can see that conversation. It's a conversation still to have.
We are also talking about what is going to be our process if we have to do distance learning with implementing that paper pencil option. What would that look like? Being more prepared for that. Who's going to be making those copies? How are we going to get that information from parents of who needs them? Those kinds of things, really spelling that out, we think is very important. We want to, like I said before, continue the meal delivery program, continue to explore the mobile Wi-Fi hotspots, definitely continue the Let's Talk feature that we have on our website, because that really helps our students, our parents, and staff to be able to communicate directly to the right person to answer their questions. This year we also want to encourage the SkyAlert feature in Skyward with our parents. It allows them to receive texts instead of just email or just getting the phone call. So we would do a call out, they would actually receive a text as well, and we know that that's probably the number one method that, just humans now like to use versus other communication methods, is that text feature. So really, publicizing that and how to go about doing that is going to be important for them to activate that in their Skyward, so that they can start receiving those messages, especially those most important notifications of if we do have to close a school and so forth, they are receiving the messages accurately and at the same time as everyone else. So those are just some examples, like I said, that you've got like 10, 11 pages there of all of the considerations that we are looking at for both distance learning and for the traditional, for that option 1. And like I said, if you've got further questions with those.
Ms. Crowell, the one piece that I think the professional development, we know the Canvas professional development is critical, but the really piece that's only a part of it. Once I know how to dial a phone, I still have to be able to do the rest of the business. We've made great progress over the last 8 years of implementing digital learning and digital transition. But we also know that there's a long way we still have to go. And having been somebody who's helped their spouse have to move their curriculum from print to digital over the last number of years, that's not a small task. I would say that one of the great successes of this district is standards-based learning and the recognition that that additional materials other than their textbook, the supplemental materials, have been a key to our success. Well, those supplemental materials are sometimes the hardest to get digitalized and part of Canvas or any LMS, because we're used to often being able to just hand them to a student, make a class set, and do it that way. Well, now there's a different whole process in that. There's even copyright issues that we have to look at. There's curriculum obligations that we have to look at to ensure that we have. I would just say that that's probably something, and I know that's on your all mind because I know that that's how you all think, but we really want to help our staff understand that we're going to be there to support them in that, because that's going to be a critical piece of them feeling that anxiety of distance learning. Because the other piece of this is, I don't think distance learning, as we have it here, is going to be about finding out on a Thursday that all of Citrus County schools are shut down. Distance learning is going to be that child has got a temperature that's impacting them for the next 4 days and they're not coming to school. And that distance learning, that we're encouraging them not to come to school so that they don't potentially impact somebody. So all of a sudden, distance learning for a few of our kids in every classroom may be every week. Distance learning can also be if we find that, that we have a self-quarantine situation. So these are not going to be, to me, the distance learning, and that Canvas is not going to be about that what-if scenario. It's going to be a part of day one.
Which is definitely very true, and that is why it's so important that they are going to be incorporating Canvas in their daily instruction, throughout the year in their classrooms. Some of them, that's going to be an easier task than others. We have many that have utilized things like Google Classroom already in their classrooms, and this is going to just be a different platform that kind of does similar type things. But then you've got many that have never done it before. So yeah, there's going to be a spectrum of experience that we're going to have to provide different levels of PD for, and that is definitely reality that we have.
One of the pieces, though, that and it's really maybe a Mr. Bishop question. Volunteers, visitors, mentors. From day one, that's a question of, now I'm coming to a school, what happens? Because we're trying to create a protective environment for staff and students, that's now entering in now a group of people that may or may not have that. And do we have a protocol that we're looking at? Is there an essential list of, let's say, volunteers that fall into an essential volunteer?
At this time, the answer is DOE has provided us their guidance and their recommendations, and in that recommendation, they said limit visitors to the schools. So how we define that, we're in its infancy right now, we have not defined it to that level, but certainly we need to follow DOE's guidelines on that. But you're right, we have a lot of volunteers who come to our school and provide tremendous service for our students, both academically and athletically, and we just have to, we're going to work through those things.
And my question too would be is if we are going, because I think we know the essentialness of our volunteers, our mentors into our success in our community, do we now incorporate some of it into our volunteer training? You know, PPE protocols, you know, safety protocols, that becomes maybe a piece that we start adding. Maybe it's even an online, you know, Canvas course that somebody takes that provides that before they can be a, you know, a regular, you know, attendee. So those are some pieces. And I think there's another aspect too. We can't underestimate, we can have virtual volunteers. They don't necessarily, we can provide now, our staff has gotten really good at Zooming. And they can, you know, that there is an opportunity too to say to somebody, you don't have to come to our campus for us to be able to provide some work to you or some help to us. So those are some opportunities we may explore if we do have to limit some of that. So thank you all. This is an enormous undertaking.
We good to move on to option number 2?
I just wanted to address one thing in terms of curriculum. And I was looking at some stuff today. I noticed that things happened like yesterday, and now that's becoming part of the history or they say, when in reality it's something that happened yesterday. It doesn't define the beginning of this country and to now. It's new. And I'm wondering, when we're doing up the learning, if that is looked at, if the students aren't just looking at, well, let's see, you know, Declaration of Independence, let's look at that. If someone has a mild statement about it, is there somebody to help that student understand that that's just an novelty statement, that is not really what happened, you know?
Yeah, I call that weeding out the background noise. You know, really looking at when you are searching for items, helping students understand what is factual and what is opinion. Absolutely.
Right.
Is that what you meant?
Absolutely. You know, you don't want it, the Beatles formed the Constitution of the United States.
Right.
No, they did
Right.
not.
Yeah, we call that weeding out that background noise.
Good.
What sources are trusted sources versus
Yeah.
not. That's all taught, that's all state in this ambit.
This counts, it's 20 to 1, and I didn't know how much further we have to go, but I'd like to at least take a break, but I'd like to entertain the discussion if maybe we should go for lunch and come back. I didn't know how much time we have left in this.
We've got option 2 and option 3.
It's up to you all, whatever you'd like to do.
We can take a break. I mean, I think if we don't keep going through, we're gonna lose it all, and I feel like poor staff is gonna have to wait around for us to go eat and come back.
I just didn't know if we still had like 2 more hours to go, or, I mean.
I don't think so, but I don't want to assume. I think the bulk of it we've gone over.
Option 2 and 3 should be a little bit quicker. And you can just turn off my mic altogether, so.
You don't have to turn it off, you're never facing it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead then and discuss option 2.
Let's take a break.
Yeah, we take a break.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
5 minute break.
So DeSantis is live as we speak. There's only no time. It's okay. You're
Forgetting you're there, you're so small, like you forget.
DeSantis is live as we speak. Yeah, I wonder what he's saying. You know, DeSantis is live as we speak. He's at